The new Dawntrail expansion to Final Fantasy XIV was so hotly anticipated, particularly because this was the beginning after the end. The previous expansion, Endwalker, took a decade-long story and managed to wrap it up in a wonderful finale that left people wondering where they would go next. And I get it, that's no easy feat. You completed the main story and have to start something new from there. That's gonna be tough. But as the internet loves to worship and idolize, if there was one man that could follow it up and knock it out of the park, it's Yoshi P. And let me tell you, he did not. Dawntrail is by far the weakest of all iterations of Final Fantasy XIV. I wouldn't even call it lukewarm. It's closer to like Greg warm. It underwhelms, it's unengaging, and sidelines the player character to a fundamental NPC who exists only to solve the actual main character's problems. And these problems all come down to the main story, the motivation, the expository world building, underbaked ideas, and let's be honest here, Wuk Lamat. All of it comes down to a single key thing: execution. And none of them fired off like they should have. Also, in case it wasn't clear, some story spoilers are going to be throughout. I also want to be clear that while Dawntrail's story is subpar, all the gameplay stuff with it is still top notch. Seriously, these are some of the coolest dungeon bosses that were a blast to fight against for the first time. Also, the level 99 8-man trial was actually tough and took me multiple attempts, which quite frankly was really nice to see. The core gameplay of Dawntrail is still excellent and pops off immediately. The instances are still fun from the get-go. Good stuff here, besides the main story quests. Probably the biggest sludge trying to wade through from the start is the world building shoved into every single line of dialogue. I'm not against world building, don't get me wrong. Everything they set up in Turtle is interesting, and it's nice to see a widely different style of culture from everywhere else in Eorzea. What isn't good is the way they presented it all. None of it is organic or diegetic or whatever word you want to use to sound like you're smarter than you actually are. It's all exposition, constantly spouted out and said to the player instead of letting the player discover anything so that it has context. Without context, it goes in one ear and out the other. There's a part early on where you go to these pillars and you're supposed to click on them to learn more about the history of Tuliolo, which is literally just me reading a textbook. Given people's attention spans these days, that isn't going to land with most of the player base. It's all exacerbated by the absolute cascading deluge of proper nouns spouted off in every single sentence. Like, keep account of how many of these are over-seasoned into the dialogue. You can't go 2 steps without a single paragraph of someone saying a plethora of names of people you haven't met, places you've never heard of, and titles that are supposed to mean something. In the first hour, you hear words like Mamulja, Zaralja, Goluljaja, Jelkbal, Hihimaha, Telubabul, Jabrulal, and Tonowata, and I only made one of those up. I felt like I needed a sheet of college-ruled paper with notes written in different colored gel pens just to keep up. There's nothing inherently wrong with these. They're all names of people or cities or alternate words of ones we already know. All of that is fine. It takes a long while before you finally pick up on what word means what or who as you progress through the story, but it's a massive obtrusion early on that leaves the player lost and wondering what the hell they're even doing and why. It's too much too fast without room to explain or absorb that information before learning the next terminology. It'd be like if you saw some people playing a cool new board game and they say, "Hey, would you like to play with us?" And you say, "Sure, but I've never played this before, how do I play?" And then they explain all the rules by speaking in HTML code. Again, nothing wrong with world building, but how you do it matters, and this ain't the way. This also causes a lot of pacing issues because the main story quest is so dull. It seriously takes 3 hours of cutscenes before you get something resembling gameplay when you finally get to attack something. Never before has the story quest ever had such an abundance of go here and right-click a person, now go here to right-click a person, cutscene, now right-click this person so you can go somewhere, meet that person halfway there to that location, right-click them, and then finally get to the destination to right-click this same person. The entire main story is about Wuk Lamat becoming the next leader of the land over her siblings by proving herself. This involves going around to every neighboring state, learning about their people and helping them with whatever problem they currently have, so that Wuk Lamat gets a different flavor of Jolly Rancher to put into her Egyptian god card or whatever. At least the premise itself lends itself to teaching you about all the different cultures and customs, if only it wasn't so goddamn boring. I mean super boring. I mean like literally falling asleep in my chair as I'm playing it boring. And what gets weird is that story is basically finished once you hit about level 96. So then you and Aaronville go to Texas for like an hour to basically waste a lot of time with some cowboys until you're pulled right back into Wuk Lamat's problems with invading spaceships and robots. I wish I was kidding. This has nothing to do with anything, but I just want to say, y'all, stop being so horny for Bakuljaja and Zaralja. Seriously? What the hell? What's bizarre is that all of the poor world-building, exposition, and uninteresting story moments all get much better from here. Once you meet the people of Alexandria and then begin to learn about that culture and how they function, it's actually pretty great. They do such a better job of showing you how it all works with much more interesting moral quandaries and even relevancy to the main plot. It's almost like this half of the story was designed by a completely different person than all that Dawn Servant stuff. The most repeated strawman argument I've seen staunch defenders retweet all the time is that nobody likes the Dawntrail story because, God forbid, it doesn't have massive world-ending stakes or massive threats that could end the universe. Ooh, sorry y'all hate world building. Knock it off with that. I'm not hungry for what you're spewing, so stop putting words in my mouth. It's fine to have a story that's more upbeat and lighthearted, or doesn't have a misguided death demon from another reality wanting to consume every living thing's chakra or whatever. You can have just as good a story, if not arguably a more interesting one, by having personal stakes. It doesn't have to be me versus the end of the world, but it sure as hell should be me versus the threat of loss. Throughout the entirety of the story, there's basically not a single reason for me, as the player character, to care. I'm completely sidelined to be the speechless NPC in Wuk Lamat's story, which is supposed to be her personal journey, but I'm the one doing everything for her. What sucks is that there are many opportunities for some kind of personal conflict that felt like Dawntrail was setting up and I was all ready for, only for it to completely fizzle out without any kind of follow through. As Wuk Lamat is journeying and fulfilling her duties to become Dawn Servant, she is in direct competition with her brother, Kona. And much like Wuk Lamat, Kona has also hired some people to assist him in his travels to become ruler, Thancred and Urianger. Oh damn, we've known these guys for a decade. They're my homies, and now they're against us? That right there is great. That's interesting. What was going to happen if at some point we became in direct conflict? Would we have to fight the comrades we've known forever? Would those two be able to follow through? Would they choose their duty to Kona over the friendship they've had with the player? How far was either side willing to go to fulfill their promise to their elected Dawn Servant? What would the fallout be like after, should such a skirmish happen? Something that could irrevocably damage the relationship between the characters that we've known for so long. Oh wait, never mind. Literally nothing like that happens. In fact, there's pretty much no reason for either of them to be there. It could have been any other two rando NPCs and would have just as much of an impact on the story as anything else. This was one of the biggest wastes of potential. Equally wasted is basically every single Scion on the 7th Dawn. Thancred and Urianger being there at all ultimately ended meaning absolutely nothing. Practically each one of them is just kind of there, adding nothing to conversations and doing nothing to move the plot forward. They're spectators at best, but have to be shoved in so that you can use them for dungeons and duties. At least give them a purpose or something to add. Look at Alize. Literally, why is she here? She's with you the entire time, and entire cutscenes go by where she doesn't say a word because she has nothing to add. Alpha knows almost as bad if he didn't run off to take care of some other thing every now and then. Estinian appears because why the hell not? At one point they're like, I called for backup. And in comes Grahatia and Yishtola, which is supposed to be like this big moment where you're like, oh dude, it's them, they're here, this is sick. And then they don't contribute anything until something magical happens and you need someone to explain it. They barely have any voice lines. I mean, I'm glad the voice actors are still getting some work, but really they could have been taken out of this expansion pack and nobody would have noticed. Seeing all of them be so underutilized is a crime when there are so many opportunities to use them. More than ever before, they've all been reduced down to tools you pull out of a box whenever you need something instead of actually letting them, you know, be characters. One of the biggest struggles to actually enjoying the story is not just because of the lack of stakes, but also because there's no real reason to care. A lot of this is because of Wuk Lamat. She has the weakest, blandest character introduction and isn't compelling enough to make anyone care about her plights from the get-go. She first shows up in the 6.55 patch content before the release of Dawntrail, which is basically about 2 hours of her being a doofus who really likes food, and then you watch her eat something in a comical manner. It's about as anime trope as it gets, and this is somehow supposed to make me want to help her deal with her Dawn Servant nonsense when all I've seen is her act like a simpleton. It is not a good introduction. That said, Wuk Lamat is a wonderful character. It is nice to have someone so unerringly upbeat and willing to engage with people. She, above all others, is the first to say, hold on, let's hear them out. It's great that she's able to have enough awareness of herself to realize that she isn't the smartest or most strategic person around, which is why she ends up respecting someone like Kona so much and needing him around. The majority of the story stuff that happens with her isn't inherently interesting, but she as a character handles it well and is endearing to see. Also, all the people complaining that Wuk Lamat being poorly voice acted and has flat deliveries? No offense, but what in the goddamn hell are you talking about? Anyone saying this is either repeating what they've seen other people say in online discourse because they can't form an opinion of their own, or they only play through the 6.55 patch scenes with her in it. The voice actress kills it in so many scenes and her performance is perfect for the character. Anytime Wuk Lamat goes through any kind of distress or confrontation, especially with Zeralja and Bukuljaja, the emotion seeps through every single line. You can't tell me hers is bad when she's going up against other voice actors who sound like they slept through their role. Anyone who says she sounds bad and prefers the Japanese audio needs to step off right now. You don't know what good voice acting is. You just like noises you don't understand. That said, she's got some real weak-ass voice directing sometimes. The final final battle voice lines come to mind. So to the voice actress for Wuk Lamat, great job, you slayed. I still stand by that Wuk Lamat is not super interesting and did not give me a strong enough reason to want to help her. Her introduction is way too weak, and I'm still not given anything to push me toward caring about her story, because instead I'm just kind of told to be there and told to do it. Even more frustrating is that all of her endeavors consisting of learning about the neighboring people, seeing their customs, their ways of life, occasionally dealing with a primal or whatever, she doesn't do any of their tasks, the player does. So it's not even like I'm willing to back her corner because I'm watching her persevere and accomplish all these things to better herself as a person. I'm the one doing all the work and she's taking credit for it. There was a single moment that was set up that could have been really interesting, and it was completely squandered. Near the end of the trials, you take a night's rest at the inn of Tuliolo, and in the middle of the night, there's a knock at the door. Who's standing there when you answer it but Wuk Lamat? She starts acting very nervous, like there's something she really wants to say but is afraid of the response. 20 seconds later, you're sitting on top of a cliff and she's chill again, talking about herself. I thought for sure this was setting up for Wuk Lamat to admit falling in love with the player. It would have been fascinating to introduce an NPC that falls in love with your character, regardless of what your race and gender is. It was the perfect setup and everything was alluding to it, only to be completely abandoned in the very next scene. She asks you if you would be by her side if she becomes Dawn Servant, which is a request that's as hollow as the story itself, because obviously you can't actually do that. You got endgame raids to go on. If they had actually committed and made Wuk Lamat be in love with you, it would change the subtext of every single scene afterwards. And hey, you know what else that would have done? Added in personal stakes to the story, which would have made it infinitely more interesting. She could admit she loves you, and then there's an inevitability of having to let her down and breaking her heart, something that could erode any positive and upbeat character such as her. Having this frequent ray of sunshine and rainbows, having to go through so much loss, struggle, and coming to terms with her own life, knowing full well that you having to turn her down is what would hurt her the most, would have been one of the most fascinating story beats they would ever have. But nah, there's nothing like that. Wuk Lamat is all about her mission, and she doesn't fall in love with you because Final Fantasy XIV has no balls. Another really easy way to make the story be from things you're just doing to a story with personal interest and a strong desire to see it through is replace Wuk Lamat. For real, imagine her exact same story, all the same story beats and everything, except it all involves someone you already know. It could be the exact same storyline, but instead of Wuk Lamat as the potential Dawn Servant, it's, I don't know, Urianger. Hell, even Erenville would have been better. Or the best possible replacement would be Y'shtola, so that my girl actually gets some goddamn character development and isn't just the Deus Ex Magica whenever they need her. If it was someone like the eternal beautiful grace of Y'shtola, there's immediate attachment, personal involvement, and potential conflict within herself and other scions. It's just another example of how weak of a protagonist Wuk Lamat is. Even if her actual personality is very enjoyable and nice to see, she doesn't have the conviction to carry the main plot on her shoulders. And that can be fine because she would be a fantastic support character with her charm, but she was not meant for the spotlight. There was a recent unofficial character popularity poll in Japan, and after 17,000 votes, they showed the top 10 favorite characters of Dawntrail. Wuk Lamat doesn't even crack the top 10. There are characters that only get like 20 minutes of screen time that beat her. I'm tired of getting these single-serving NPCs that are going to be completely ignored come the next expansion pack. Yoshi P did not cook with Dawntrail's story. Those dungeons are still sublime and there are some fantastic raids, but this is the biggest snooze fest 14 has ever had. I would rather replay a Realm Reborn story again than sit through this one. I sincerely hope that this isn't indicative of what to expect with their story content and expansions moving forward, because it might be dull enough for me to actually cancel my subscription. It isn't atrocious or offensively bad, mind you, it's just the absolute weakest they've ever had. And when they've set their own bar as high as they have, you can't help but feel disappointed.